This is IBM Museum. And the system I have on the bench behind me is an IBM PS2 model 53 SLC2. And this is a rather late model PS2. It is of the 9500 series. It's a 9553. That puts it in with the late model PS2s. This, in fact, has a BIOS of 1993, which is pretty uncommon for the PS2 line. I mean, the series was kind of coming to the close at that point. Now, of this case style, and I can get turned around and kind of show some aspects to the case. It had a very similar appearance to a model that preceded it, and that was the PS2 model 55SX, 8555. So it's in the 8500 series. Now, the 55SX was a later PS2 that IBM released after the initial 286 versions of the Model 50 and 60 came out. And then the Model 80, Model 70, Model 80 at the 386DX level. But the 55SX was based on the Intel 386SX 16 megahertz. And we've seen that in prior videos of what trouble that was to go through and do the clip over upgrades and things like that. Now, IBM, as it went through and released the 55SX, you can just really see the evolution as they went through. And they had, I mean, the initial release was considered a cockroach planer because they had a chip that was actually upside down, hot glued on the planer, and had bodge wires into it and everything else to fix issues. They went through different riser versions, different planer versions, and there was a lot of problems. But the PS2, of the PS2 models, the 55SX was supposed to be the most heavily produced model. And for its size, I mean, it pretty good workhorse that was out there in a lot of places, but it's just underpowered for the CPU level that it came with and the problems that it had. It didn't even have the microchannel extended CMOS. It just had the 4 adapter slots. Actually, the 4th slot used for the hard drive, the DBA ESDI hard drive, and so it didn't necessarily require extended CMOS, but that was a big limitation in the machine. And later on, when IBM came out with a later planar version for it, they put on there for a provision of extended CMOS and had another model that they put out of a submodel of it called the 55LS land station, and that had the BIOS the same date as the 65SX, the tower version of it. Now, with the 55LS, IBM improved some aspects. You could see which model they were trying to strive for with the 55SX from the origins. And a company that was composed of former IBM employees to a large part, called Reflex Corporation, actually had a planer that you could replace on your 55SX. And it was just known as the Reply 55. And it really enhanced. I mean, it was a popular upgrade, and that people went out and got just to kind of kick up the 55SX that they had. I mean, it went through and replaced a major component of the model. I mean, it replaced the whole motherboard, but it was really where the 55SX should have been. And IBM took notice of that. They went through and they actually sourced that planer. They put it into a model of the 55LS 486. They went through and used that 46 connotation of the reply planar having an IBM CPU on it, actually a 46 SLC2 50 megahertz. And what that means is that the chip was almost a pin compatible replacement of the 386SX, but went through, it was able to run all the 46 SX instructions, and it was at clock doubled speed, and it had 16 KB of L1 cache that really made it perform very well, and just really just kicked up the performance of the planar. It's a very good CPU for the limitations of that the CPU had in 24 bits of address lines and 16 bits of data lines, but did very well. Now, the Model 53, excuse me, the Reply 55 went through and it put enough SIM sockets so you could have even 16 megabyte, the system maximum, on the planar itself. You even had it had 3 slots, so you could even end up in an instance where you had a SIM slot effectively left over in going through and adding RAM to it. So very much different from the 55SX. Now, I'll go through and I'll bring up the page to the Model 53 SLC2 in just a moment here. And that's the reason I'm going through and, getting confused in this case between the Reply 55, the 55 LS46, and this Model 53 SLC2 is that IBM had the same planar in there. They have effectively the Reply 55 planar in there. And this is really where the system, I mean, the Model 55 should have been from the beginning, or a little bit quicker of time frame than what it took with IBM. It took, a third party of the Reply Corporation producing a planar to improve the system, and then IBM going through with the making the case a little bit better for this, because the Model 55SX had just the 2 bays here. They'd actually have the diskette drive in this position and the hard drive, that DBA ESDI hard drive, in this position here. And so there was no room for any other drives on the system at all. Of course, you can add CD-ROMs. You couldn't do anything like that. And that's how you really tell the Model 53 SLC2 apart, is that it has a diskette drive opening here. And I went through a few days ago, and I finally popped off the front bezel cover to kind of take a look at the drives and things like that, and notice this lower bay. And this is just, this is great for having more drives in here. I've got plans actually for a unit like this. And it's interesting that the front bezel cover, and I've got it, of course, pulled off. This isn't my boo-boo for it's just quick release latches as a way to release it. Although I did go through and I pulled off the inner cover as well. And that goes through, and that's the only removable piece otherwise on this bezel. Even the diskette drive, the slot and the button hole are molded into this case. This is not removable from this bezel or not. So I guess it's always going to have a diskette drive that's on there. And then, of course, we can look at the badge of the system, get the right lighting there, that nice silver colored So the PS2 5346 SLC2. And this unit is just, I mean, as I say, the bays and everything else. Now it goes through, and the 55SX had the Dallas module. It's kind of notorious for needing a battery for external battery modification these days. The 53 SLC2 has a Dallas module, but it's a DS 1387, and it has actually the extended CMOS that's built into that chip. And the real irony is the DS 1287, the earlier real-time clock chip of the 55SX, with that battery modification, it actually runs less electronics than this does. And I see those 1287 chips discharged all the time where you have to add the external battery. But these DS 1387s that are on these units, I've not seen a flat one yet. I don't know what it is. If you know the battery inside, the internal battery, is the same size. I just can't I can't understand at all really for why that battery has a charge. Now, the video on this is actually a Cirrus Logic chipset. Really kind of cool. I'll go through where also to show, in addition to, moving the diskette drive over, there's not even though it uses the riser of the 55SX, and that riser even went through modifications on the 55SX lifespan. But there used to be a cable connection for that DBA ESDI hard drive, and that's no longer the case. That connector is unused here because these are IDE drives. It supports an IDE drive. It doesn't have the long block addressing support for the IDE drives, so you go up to 512 megabyte unless you have like a drive manager or some other way of going through and putting on a drive that's larger than that. But for the time frame, that was very good. I mean, it was very much an improvement over the DBA ESDI drive. Let me get forward here before I go any further. And I want to go over the page at the Ardent tool for the 55 SLC2. And going through to where I can interact with it here, just to show the planar diagram and just show the improvement of what that was compared to the 55SX. And there's just so much power improvements. And as I say, with the IDE connection for the hard drive, and it even has that's why it gives me ideas. It has a second connection for another drive. And so I'm looking at, am I going to put it like a zip drive and stuff like that? And also has the power connectors for those drives, not the older, where the 55SX just had power to the planar and it ran the hard drive and diskette drive from the planar. There's a power connector on this unit that goes to the additional drives that you can power, 2 additional drives that you can power. And you do want to be careful that you don't load that power supply down. I'm trying to think, there's probably a wattage indicator somewhere on it, but and on this sheet, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to install PC-DOS 6.1. Now, I was going to go through and put on PC-DOS 7 and even do a video showing that installation and look through my Model 53s, and I've got a unit with PC-DOS 7 on it already. Had a unit with PC-DOS 5 on there. And so I thought, well, this middle model, I'll put that 6.1 PC-DOS version on there. And then I can go through and run through the qconfig as well as that utility from PC-DOS to kind of show some things of the Model 53. I'll link this page to in the video description, and to so people can go through and look that over. But let's go through, get me turned around, and I can probably go through and start working with the unit a little bit to installing that PC-DOS as well. Let's go through and power the unit on. I'll go through and switch over to the video capture. And as you see, this goes through and counts to that 16 megabyte of RAM. Now, for some reason, I think I picked up most of these Model 53s together in this set. I think I picked them up from the local Department of Transportation here for the state. And it was interesting for me to see. I saw this MS-DOS, and it prompts for the time and date, which means that I don't have an autoexec.bat, and it is MS-DOS version 6.22. I don't know if I'm the one that really did this or not. I may have gone through and installed an ID drive on it. I don't know. I don't know if the place I got them for may have stripped out the hard drives possibly, but when I did a directory of this unit, all it is the boot files, command.com, and the 2 boot files that are hidden for this entire hard drive, which looks like probably 120 megabyte. So that's why I thought, well, I've got to put on, get the PC-DOS going on it. I'm going to I did the Control-Delete, going to go through and boot from the diskette. And I really would have liked to show, I mean, I can probably go through and work with that other unit. I would have liked to show the PC-DOS 7 installation because it does have a little bit of differences from here. And I do have true diskettes that I of PC-DOS 7. It would have, I could have gone through and used them, although it's already on that other system. So we're going to go through, and I don't know if I'll work with that aspect of moving that screen off or not, but certainly we can go through and get started. And we will probably go through and accept the defaults for this. Okay. And for let's look at probably installing the disk compression, central point backup, DOS shell, antivirus. I'll leave out the PCMCIA support, and the install path is good. Okay. And I'm going to get further along in this installation, and I'll come back and unpause this. I just don't want to end up with a brutally long video with just the PC-DOS installation. I did those videos in my live streams and things like that, of even close to a 6-hour live stream at one point of doing in part working with the PC-DOS 6.1 exactly as I have here. Okay, it's proceeded further into the setup. For some reason, the PC-DOS 6.1 that's from WinWorld goes through and it gives a message on the 5th diskette that it's converting the DOS shell files over to this particular format, and it just leaves the diskette access light on. And so I'll probably go through and interrupt the system at this point, just because I don't know. It just seems to be hung. And I've encountered this particular issue before with these diskettes. So I will go through and do I'll see if I can get the system to either warm reboot. If not, I'll go through and do a hard boot. Now, for all that, I didn't shift the screen. I'm thinking of if I run the qconfig program here, I probably want to to move it on the screen. Okay, and still no autoexec.bat, although now we have the PC-DOS 6.10, and I'll go through and I can certainly go through and create those autoexec.bat and config sys and get a working file set on boot to properly use all that RAM and everything else. For the qconfig program, and I'm going to go through and I'll do the /D for the details and do the /P for pausing the screen. So this goes through and shows and it's interesting for showing the ROM copyright. This system does not have the ROM basic to it. I've looked through the BIOS, and that's probably the origins of this BIOS coming in, that it's ultimately a reused Reply 55 planar. And the in fact, we'll go through because it's identifying, it's not identifying as much as I've seen with the PC-DOS 7. And I don't know the time frame of when this version of PC-DOS 6.1 came out as a comparison to the 53 SLC2. And I'm going to go through. So what we'll do, and I'm inserting the diskette where I have the qconfig program from PC-DOS 7 into the diskette drive. And the diskette drive is a 2.88 megabyte drive. And we'll see that. I don't think it showed it for... Yeah, it shows it as 1.44 on this qconfig that's with the PC-DOS 6.1. I'm going to go through and I'm going to revert to the root directory. Well, I'm not in a conflict. I don't have a qconfig in this directory. And we are going to go through, and I think it's an exe, and we're copying that to the root drive. So even be a chance to go through and do a comparison to, if I'd go through and do the same qconfig/d/p. Okay. So here we get into the machine type where it said 386 compatible or something like that before on that other qconfig screen. This identifies as IBM PS2 Model 53 SLC2. That's great. Dedicated or definitive identification of the machine. And it goes through and identifies the CPU, the IBM 46 SLC2, processor speed 50 megahertz, and the stepping code, the processor code of A4, stepping code of 22 hex. And of course, the same identification, it's a microchannel system. And here it is still identifying that diskette drive. Maybe this one is a 1.44. I don't know. Let me look. Because I had, okay, yeah, because I have my 2.88 megabyte. So the Model 53 is able to run the 2.88 megabyte, although sometimes there are models that came with the 1.44 megabyte drives. The other Model 53s I have a 2.88 megabyte drive on them. And so hopefully that explanation will go through, and just as we have that something different from what I expected to crop up. And so let's it shows the memory with this version of qconfig a little bit better, showing that it has on memory 1 and 2, it has 4 megabyte, and then an 8 megabyte in the third SIM slot. Okay. And then I don't have any adapters present, but I will. I will soon. I want to go through and I want to add an Adaptec SCSI controller to one of my Model 53s and go through, and also these bay adapters. Really nice that I have the extra diskette drive cable. That I think going through and putting a GoTech might be kind of interesting, having both a diskette drive and a GoTech. I'm able to do that. And of course that needs a little adapter for the GoTech pinout, but those are common. I've shown those on videos before. And then even for that IDE connection, I'm looking at like maybe a zip drive or something like that as a possibility. Although, if I have like a SCSI adapter and things like that, I can always have external zip drive and external CD-ROM and things like that too for that. So I think I can go through and use these systems and have end up with a very nice system. What the 55SX should have been sooner for IBM. I thought that if it had been really good if they'd have produced this level of the for what they intended the 55SX to be, and not have gone through a little bit more of a convoluted evolution with maturing the machine. But If you enjoy this video, go ahead and click on that like button. And as always, subscribe to my channel if you've not done so already. Invite your friends to subscribe to my channel as well. That would be great. Get the subscriber count up a little bit more. But this is IBM Museum. That's all I have for now. Thank you.